Waging war. War is the natural state of man, for it is in battle that he has made his greatest achievements. It is at the heart of every endeavor, and those who claim otherwise are doomed to die on the same swords they decry. Attributed to Saint Drusus. The ability to successfully wage war is crucial to the survival of a rogue trader as surely as are his skills in business, diplomacy, and void-faring. It is the strong arm and the implicit threat of violence that lend weight to a man's words in the Imperium. Indeed, in a place as lawless and God-Emperor forsaken as the Colonus expands, a rogue trader's martial prowess is often the only measure by which others judge him. Knowing this, a wise trader studies war with the same fervor as he studies markets and currencies. He knows the value of war to the nearest throne, understanding that the true cost of war is reflected in more than banking ledgers and casualty lists. They must be able to weigh every factor in war, from costs and benefits to the social and political ramifications. This is what sets a rogue trader apart from a common chartist captain or business concern. He has the ability to raise an army and a fleet of ships to carry it, and the legal, moral, and ethical backing of the administratum that allows him to use them as he sees fit. This makes him unique among his peers. Unique and dangerous, for the rights and responsibilities granted in a warrant of trade, especially those pertaining to waging war in the name of the God Emperor, can be so easily and so tragically misused. Warfare is an intricate dance full of ever-shifting alliances and uncertain futures, and is not to be entered into lightly. When committed, a rogue trader must pursue it with all of the strength, courage, and violence that he can muster. Only then will he see the fruits of his violent labors. Taking part in a war, whether as a belligerent or simply an interested party, is expensive, risky, deadly, and has brought ruin to more rogue trader houses than can be counted. Why then do so many pursue it? The answers to these questions are as varied and as telling as the men and women who give them. There is no constant, no prescribed list of conditions that can decide when waging a war is prudent or not. One thing is for certain though. While the benefits of waging war can be truly staggering, and may make a man a king, the cost of failure is always death. Whether true death, or the myriad of little deaths like humiliation, loss of power, loss of wealth, or even enslavement. These are all important issues to keep in mind when approaching war, though they are by no means the only ones, and it is a fool who disregards their importance. Reasons for war. Wars have been fought throughout the eons for any number of reasons, and in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, this is especially true. Whether for conquest, faith, or simply business, there are any number of reasons to pursue war, such as the War of Conquest. Wars of conquest are military endeavors wherein the attacker seeks to subjugate an enemy through sheer force of arms. They are waged mainly to acquire some sort of prize, typically land and natural resources, but oftentimes also slaves or some other form of wealth held by the defenders. Since the goal is the occupation of enemy lands, the subjugation of its people, and the exploitation of their resources, wars of conquest are infinitely complex. They require better planning, larger and longer-term commitments, and perhaps more finesse than wholesale slaughter. They also have a permanency about them, for once an invading force enters a land for conquest, they are typically there to stay. Rogue traders rarely take part in wars of conquest, at least not as the conqueror. Wars of this type tend to tie a man to a single place and make him responsible for a whole lot of sedentary, ground-based activities like reconstruction, defense, and subjugation. As this is anathema to many free-wheeling rogue traders who typically prefer the bridge of a void ship to the halls of government. They tend to take ancillary roles in other people's wars of conquest, supplying weapons and material, providing monetary or temporary military backing in the form of void ships and house troops, establishing logistics chains, and smuggling have made many a fortune during a larger conflict. A war of faith. By far, the single most common reason to wage war throughout the Imperium of Man. The religious war is perhaps also the easiest to justify. The opening salvo of many a bloody campaign has come on the tail of the phrase, "The God Emperor wills it." Indeed, it could be said that the justification for all wars the Imperium embarks on are, at their heart, fueled by zealous piety, or at least draped in its trappings. These are just wars, wars based on ecclesiastical doctrine whose atrocities and crimes are justified, even called for, by the God Emperor himself. The reasons behind them rarely matter, even to the generals and admirals commanding the vast imperial military forces. For them, it is enough that the Emperor wills it, and so it shall be done. Due to the nature of the imperial creed, wars of faith may be waged against any who oppose the rightful rule of the Imperium of Man, be they alien, heretic, or rebel. However, the Imperium reserves a special hatred for one foe: the forces of the Ruinous Powers. These wars can be faster and more intense than any other wars, although this is by no means a guarantee. Since their goal is simply destruction more than conquest, they usually end when the aggressor has either wiped out the heathens and heretics, converted them, or taught them a sufficiently hard lesson. Afterwards, the aggressor will leave behind some religious officials and missionaries to see that their work stuck and that their new converts remain on the narrow path. Garrisons of troops may be left behind as well to keep peace and enforce new doctrines, but the majority of the invading forces will be withdrawn to their bases, leaving the rest of the work to the priests and adepts. Due to their relative quickness, high potential for gain, and the ease with which a person can get an enemy labeled a heretic in the Imperium, religious wars are quite popular among rogue traders. Whether based on true religious fervor or simply used as a convenient excuse, many a rogue trader has waged war with conspicuous displays of prayer and breast-beating. Unlike wars of conquest, in which they tend to take secondary roles, they often take a very active and enthusiastic role in religious wars. What better way is there to prove your piety than by killing the enemies of the God Emperor? Indeed, many warrants of trade specifically call for the wielder to make war amongst the heretics and bring his holy light to the godless heathens at the furthest reaches of space. Xenocide. Xenocide, similar in theory to its cousin genocide, is the act of waging war for the sole purpose of completely eradicating an intelligent alien species. To the Imperium, xenocide is accepted and even advocated as a religious imperative of humanity, and is yet another common mandate dictated to rogue traders by the warrants of trade. While not all of them are compelled to pursue campaigns of xenocide in their warrants, nearly all are expected to assist Imperial forces in campaigns against Xenos. While all of them tacitly agree to this upon receipt of their warrants, in practice it is a different matter altogether. Away from the watchful eyes of the Imperium, many a pragmatic rogue trader has turned his back on human settlements besieged by Xenos when the cost of assisting outweighed the benefits of leaving their fellow humans to their fates. The Defensive War. A true defensive war is waged in answer to an aggressor's attack. Of course, many warmongers would have it believed that their wars are defensive wars. They justify their aggression by real or imagined threats, but their wars are predicated on a desire for wealth, land, and power. A true defensive war is fought to deny the enemy territory or resources, and often there is little reward save the preservation of what one already possesses. The ongoing defense of the Cadian Gate in the Cadian sector against the Black Crusades of Chaos is one example of a defensive war, as is the recent war fought on the world of Damaris against the Orc invaders. While those fighting a defensive war are typically caught flat-footed in the early stages of the conflict, they will have certain advantages over their attackers due to fighting on familiar ground, being closer to supply lines, and even the knowledge that they must win or perish. Due to the smaller potential profits of a defensive war, it is not something rogue traders get involved with often. However, the potential rewards in both finances and reputation for coming to the aid of an embattled people should never be overlooked. The reputation of the Esme Corda changed from pirate and backguard to hero of the Imperium almost overnight after that rogue trader participated in the destruction of the space hulk Cauldron of Savagery in 673 M40. War as distraction. What better way to cover illicit activities and shady dealings than with a bloody armed conflict? As heinous as it may sound to some, inciting war for purposes of misdirection and obfuscation can be a perfectly legitimate, if perhaps slightly underhanded, business practice. A war pursued by way of distraction is often fought by proxies. Thanks to their usual business dealings, rogue traders often have a ready supply of mercenaries and hired thugs that they can call upon for just such an occasion. While the hirelings sow discord and fomenting armed conflict, the trader can go about their business. This is war by proxy. Sometimes they must wage a war, but cannot be seen to have done so. When they need some dirty work done, and it is either inconvenient or impolitic to get dirt on their own hands, there are plenty of private military organizations in Imperial space more than willing to do it for them, including other rogue traders. War by proxy is a war fought on behalf of one party, typically unknown to the actual combatants and hired through numerous cutouts and front organizations, by professional mercenaries or other agents. While it can be a clean, expedient way to wage war, the risks of doing so should not be underestimated. Without direct control of events, such wars have a way of spiraling out of control, possibly hampering the very goals they were supposed to obtain. War profiteering. Sometimes it is more profitable to supply a war than it is to fight it. War profiteering is as old as the act of war itself, and much like war, is both lauded and detested. War profiteers are individuals or groups who make their profits by selling important material to belligerents in an armed conflict, and can range from a guardsman selling the las gun of a dead comrade to the manufactoria of the Calixis sector, such as the Merover Combine, Loy Metalworks, and Lindworm Armory. Although war profiteering is typically thought of as the selling of weapons, fighting vehicles, and other wartime impedimenta, the need for any valuable commodity can be exploited for profit in times of war. Medical supplies, foodstuffs, and raw materials all tend to be in high demand in a war zone. It is not unheard of for a canny war profiteer to sell his wares to both sides of a conflict. There have even been cases of war profiteers instigating armed conflicts for the sole purpose of supplying arms and resources to the belligerents involved, at wartime prices, of course. Rogue traders are adept at war profiteering. They are well placed to buy commodities low, ship them to willing war zones, and sell them for a tidy profit to all comers. In fact, the business of making war a business is many a rogue trader dynasty's core dealings. Mustering Troops. Almost anything can be bought for the right amount of thrones, including everything a military-minded entrepreneur needs to wage war. When a rogue trader goes about the business of raising troops for war, he has three options: raise the troops and form units himself, hire established mercenary groups, or officially acquire forces of the Imperium's military through the exercise of his warrant. Each has costs and benefits which must be carefully weighed before they can gather men to their flag. Forming units from the ground up gives them complete control over the composition of their forces, but is costly and time-consuming. The rogue trader must enlist or draft the troops, then procure their weapons, armor, vehicles, equipment, food, uniforms, and shelter. This process can take months or even years, and thus is usually undertaken only by the wealthy. Hiring mercenaries is simpler, especially in the Colonus Expanse, where plenty of individual warriors or mercenary bands can be bought. Money spent on mercenaries is money spent on a known quantity. Mercenary companies get work by reputation and word of mouth, so a prospective employer typically knows what he is getting for his thrones. Unfortunately, reliable mercenaries are seldom cheap. Finally, some rogue trader warrants allow the bearer to requisition units of the Imperial Guard. Though this may seem appealing, such concepts often work better in theory rather than in practice. Units are often unavailable for one reason or another, and a local Imperial governor may find it convenient to ignore a rogue trader's request rather than give up well-trained and well-equipped soldiers. As Imperial governors are as politically powerful as many rogue traders, this obstacle can prove insurmountable, no matter what their warrant says. Now, the Battle Brothers of the Adeptus Astartes are arguably the finest warriors in the galaxy. While ancient treaties compel them to aid the Imperium in times of need, few such treaties exist between the Adeptus Astartes and rogue traders in such far-flung regions of the galaxy as the Colonus expands. That being said, it is not unheard of for Space Marine chapters to assist them in times of war, especially when the need is great or their goals are aligned. Outfitting forces. Once the units are assembled, the second step of going to war involves equipping them. While hired mercenaries and Imperial Guard units blessedly come with their own weapons, vehicles, and other material, when a rogue trader raises a unit from scratch, he will find himself acting as both warlord and supply officer. Troops need a dizzying array of supplies to operate effectively. Along with weapons, vehicles, and armor, units also need food, medical supplies, tools, field equipment, uniforms, and all manner of accoutrement to keep them in top shape. This represents a massive outlay of thrones, typically more than was spent to hire the men. Rogue traders outfitting troops have two options available to them to keep costs down: purchasing in bulk or lowering quality. A soldier is only as effective as the equipment he is issued. While some military scholars will argue otherwise, claiming that superior training can overcome inferior equipment, it does not matter how good an infantryman's training has been, if his last gun will not shoot and his armor is in tatters. Unfortunately, sacrifices often need to be made when outfitting large units, and soldiers usually have to make do with what they have been given. Now, for the last part: transporting and deploying forces. To war, to death, and to the God Emperor. A traditional toast among mercenary forces. Once a force has been mustered and equipped, all that is left is to move it where it is needed and deploy it to the battlefield. This will involve specifically configured void ships to transport all the men and material, escorts to protect them, and shuttles, landing craft or drop pods to ferry everything from orbit to a planetary surface. Once on the surface, units are assumed to have with them the appropriate vehicles, such as tanks, fighter craft, or riding beasts, as fits their unit, as these were acquired during the outfitting stage. If the rogue trader's troops do not have the necessary ships and aircraft on hand, or cannot acquire them easily from their dynasty, they will need to contract for their force's passage. Their best choice would be an ally, colleague, or chartist captain who specializes in hauling troops. Their ships will already be configured as troop carriers. They are trustworthy and can typically be had for the price of some favors. Failing that, their next best bet is a private military company, specializing in what is known in the business as void lift work, the profession of transporting men and material from war zone to war zone. It is important to note that the Imperial Navy may or may not be willing to aid in void transport. This usually depends on a rogue trader's warrant and relations with the Navy, as an admiral is more likely to aid a respected trader than one who is practically a pirate. However, traders are noble peers of the Imperium, and their ability to requisition aid includes the Imperial Navy. However, the Navy is unlikely to transport non-Imperial or Xenos forces.